Hey, U.S. history students, it's Mr. Baker again. This is Baker's Backyard or Baker's Corner. We're going to focus our attention today on our week 3 APUS history set of skills. We're moving into next week, which will be our first long essay writing. And what we're going to focus on today is the historical skills of comparison, causation, and contextualization. So a couple of things, you're going to probably want to pause your screen during this video to do a little bit of practice and application here. So if you want to have some paper out to kind of brainstorm, might be a good idea too. But we're going to be applying some of the things that we've been learning in our first 2 units to try to make a little bit of application with these skills. So let's go and get started. So with contextualization, this is a skill that a lot of you probably have always heard people say, keep that in context or whatever. And it's like, okay, it's implied to an extent what people mean. But what we want to be familiar with, ladies and gentlemen, here is what does it really mean when it comes to showing an understanding of history? Okay, so we're going to give a good basic nuts and bolts definition of it. And then we're going to basically look at how could we use it to define what eventually next week we'll do, which is creating introductory paragraphs and setting up a good thesis paragraph. So look what it says. What is contextualization? It's defined as the, quote, influence that shapes a given situation. What in the world does that mean? Setting a scene. You were trying to show the reader, guys, before he or she ever gets to something that you want to argue about, a historically defensible, clear line of reasoning thesis, whatever word you want to use, AP language or not, you want to be able to show that reader that you know what is about ready to happen, or what has happened, pardon me, and you want to be able to show him or her, whoever is reading your work, that, you know what, I can set up an argument. Context is purposeful if it can basically set the tone or set up your reader to understand where you're going at with your thesis. I like what it says here. It's opening a door to a main argument, okay? And so how do we do that? Well, first of all, you got to know a little bit about what's really transpiring before. And I heard one person say it like this, that there are ways to do contextualization that take into account during and also after. However, it seems to be that probably setting the tone before is going to be something that probably is suggested. All right, but you can do it other ways. But at the end of the day, guys, what you're trying to do is you're trying to show this reader or person that you have an established set of background points. In other words, you know something about what has happened, what is about ready to happen, et cetera, okay? That will help you define your thesis. Regardless of whether you're going to be comparing, contrasting, showing causation, showing continuity change, doesn't matter what kind of thinking skill you're going to write about and apply, context sets up the basis of your argument, okay? So preceding events and developments that happen immediately before, again, that's probably going to be where most of you will go with your establishment of context, and makes a clear connection between the context and the argument. In other words, guys, you're not just putting in there, okay, I'm going to put a bunch of facts and then do a thesis. It needs to be connected, okay? So you're using this context, what I like to call purposefully, okay? And then 2 to 3 major ideas or outside pieces of evidence that you can basically use. Now, concepts, specific ideas, not just generalizations, are obviously where you want to go, okay? But you're trying to establish a situation, okay? So I want you all guys to pause after we go over this really quick. Maybe take about 2 to 3 minutes to brainstorm this question on advanced placement, okay? So the past week, we studied the settlement of British North America, or actually the last 2 weeks, okay? So we studied the differences in southern colonies, middle colonies, New England colonies, and we talked about things from the history, when, why, what effects there were, et cetera, which effects, guys, keep in mind, will be long going, okay? And so what I want you to do is think about time period 2. It starts off at 1607, and it basically ends around 1754, okay? So you're looking at about 147 years of history that you can use to write an essay about a topic. But in this case, you're trying to set up what you know about colonial settlement prior to the settlement of Jamestown. So what would be 2 or 3, maybe even 4 things? It's always better to have more. You can have less if you want, but I would say probably more is better in this case. And so pause your screen, brainstorm, and then unpause it when you're done. Are you finished? How could you establish context to show an understanding of British colonial settlement? What has already been done? What have the Spanish done to encourage other European settlements by the English, the French, etc.? Okay, what kind of competition do we see developing between even the Europeans and the Native American populations? Okay, what kind of economic systems have we already started to see being established because of colonialism and trade? Okay, those were 4 things easily that you could have obviously developed. What's the role of religion even with encouraging colonial settlement? Okay, any of those things, guys, you could have wrote about to at least have an idea about context. Okay, and so you might be wondering, well, why do we start off with context? Well, whenever we're looking at any thinking skill, comparison, causation, continuity and change, we'll do a little bit later. The one thing, guys, we want to ask ourselves is that when we are writing about comparison in this case, or even causation, there are going to be concepts and group topics. Okay, so you want to be thinking about what are some big things, themes that we've studied that really stand out that will give you a brainstorm on how to go about looking at something like comparison. Now, keep in mind a couple of things. Big group topics. You've got political developments, economic. What do we mean when we say society? That's a very broad thing. Interactions with groups, okay? Interactions between groups and their environment. That could also be geography, okay? And so I want you guys to think about this prompt. Compare the impact of geography on the development of British North American colonies. Okay? And it's also, guys, remember, implied. Whenever you see a question that has compare, that you also contrast. Okay? So I want you to think, when we talk about British North American colonies, how can we basically categorize those colonies into even groups that would be northern colonies, middle colonies, and also southern colonies? And even take into consideration, guys, even differences, excuse me, within even colonies within each one of those individual regions. Okay, so I would take about 5 minutes, pause here, basically type in or write in, I should say, as many things as you can find that you think would show an understanding of how geography is impacting the development of these things, okay, or not as much. That could be another argument you can make. And we'll come back and we'll see how comparison allows us to also connect to the third thing, which is causation. Did you have a minute to brainstorm that? Now, obviously, we don't have time to go over everything, but which one of those 3 would probably be the most linked to geography? That's an argument that you have to make, but probably a lot of that goes back to weather and land and geographic circumstances. So a lot of that could go back to economic development, the way that they're going to use the resources that are available to them, the way that they're going to develop markets and their goods to sell abroad. Okay, so what similarities existed economically between the 3 types of regions of colonies? You could have had agriculture, but variances within that agriculture as a difference. You could have had, obviously, the development of trade as a similarity, but also the idea of differences because of warm water ports as opposed to cold water ports. Okay, You could have focused your attention on maybe the degree of the slave trade affecting the southern colonies as opposed to the north and the middle. You could even look at, guys, society with those kinds of things as well. Okay, so the point is that the more you have to show similarity and difference, guys, the better the arguments that you're going to be able to make, because you have evidence to back it up. This is going to be where we transition next to causation. Okay, and so causation is not identical to, of course, comparison, but we're looking at cause and effect. Okay, so in this case, we want to be able to think about, okay, what would be a cause for, let's say, the settlement of Jamestown as opposed to the settlement of a colony like, Massachusetts Bay or Pennsylvania or even New York or New Netherlands before then, excuse me. Okay, and we want to be able to label, guys, and make a distinction between the kind or the type of cause, distant versus immediate. Okay, and use the young up-and-coming historian are going to have to make a decision on that. Okay, would distant be something that, let's say, for example, if you're looking at the effects of political development or religion, you could look at the immediate, settlement of, let's say, Plymouth, and let's say you're focusing on the idea of self-government and how the Mayflower Compact established that immediately, whereas distant would be, if you're looking at an event like the Great Awakening, right, or the first one, pardon me, in the 1730s and 40s, and you start to look at the effects of that, let's say, on the dawn or the coming of the American Revolution, all right, that would be something that, again, is happening longer away from those things. So you have to be able to define those, okay? And so, again, take a look at the similarity between comparison and contrast. You are basically categorizing these kinds of causes. Do they have political causes? For example, when you're looking at the idea of representing the government in, let's say, early Jamestown, 1619, with the House of Burgesses, right, and the establishment of legislatures, and then you're looking, let's say, at the town meeting, which would be, 1620s, 1630s, etc. Okay, what happens as we move further into the 1730s and 40s, right, when you start to see a greater influence of things like the Enlightenment and ideas from John Locke and natural rights, okay? Those are things to consider with causes over time. Environment and geography, economic, okay? And also society. That could be social structure, all right? The list goes on and on. What you want to do, pause your screen again, take a moment to maybe fill out this chart using the same prompt as the previous slide. So, but you want to think about the causes of the impact of geography as opposed to just comparison. And you might be wondering, Mr. Baker, why? Well, pause, reflect on causes, and the next slide or two will give us clarity on that. Okay, did you have a chance to evaluate both kinds of causes between the 1607 starting point of Unit 2 and also the 1754 ending point? Okay, this could easily take you also into the next unit, right? So don't be surprised, guys, on long essays and DBQs if there is a degree of overlap. It can happen, and oftentimes it does happen, okay? And so the question is, all right, how do we basically connect comparison to causation? Okay, well, we're trying to make an argument about comparison. There is an implication about bringing causation into the reasons for similarities and differences. Okay, so what does this mean? It means that if you're going for that last major point, whether you're looking at something like a long essay with complexity or whether you're looking at something along the lines of a DBQ with complexity, guys, the point is that if you can show a clear connection between these two things, you are basically developing an argument that shows multiple variables within the same thing, comparison and contrast, and you're also connecting it to causation, which is going to make your reader be extremely happy and fulfilled. All right. I can tell you, having read these essays for about a decade at this point in my life, when you see historical writing that makes these connections, it makes you want to jump out of your seat in joy. Because as a lot of my colleagues would probably agree, it does not happen all the time. And so what we want to think about is, how do we make this habitual? Well, think about what I just said. Connect similarity and differences to causation. Okay? And so think about, what have I learned about a time period that I have to write about? Again, you don't want to just write, well, you know, the colonies developed, you know, and they all were different. No, the prompt is going to give you specific things. The first prompt on a couple slides ago, you saw that. Compare how geography affected the development of British North American colonies in the different regions. Okay? So how would the causes of, let's say, Jamestown settlement affect that? Right? Complexity. Okay? Now it is suggested on this slide, and this is the last one, guys, we'll look at, one of the last ones, for you to basically think about the 3 thinking skills from today's brief lesson and how you could basically use all 3 of those to basically start to plan. I'm not going to write a thesis today, but to actually plan an essay that you could actually start to create evidence with to support comparison and also connecting to the causation. Okay. So if you're in the regular session, we'll go over this as a group. If you're not, I encourage you guys to take about 5 to 10 minutes of your time, go over it, basically try to fill in, let's say, each one of these with at least 2 to 3 pieces of outside evidence. Now, guys, keep in mind, when you're doing a timed writing, you are probably not going to have time to develop every single one of these things. But what do you want to definitely do? You want to definitely address geography, make a connection to at least one of the other things, and show causation. All right. So how does geography affect the development of, let's say, the economy? Okay. Or complexity here, you could basically show how another variable affected the development of British colonial North American colonies. Now, you can't completely ignore the effects of geography. But if you were to make an argument, let's say, that political ideology had a dramatic effect on development, or even, let's say, society, the way that people settled in different groups and things, that is an argument, guys, that is waiting to have complexity literally ringing all over it. Okay. This is Mr. Baker. Hope you're doing well. That's Baker's Corner for the day. Feel free to reach out to me at bakerd@franklinacademy.org. We're going to work next time on the idea of thesis building, developing context further, and also how to plan an essay for our first major essay that will deal with time period 2 on British North American colonization. As always, hope you're doing well. Hope this video was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you, and have a good one. Bye-bye.